thank you guys for joining us. We're going to get started with our virtual class here in just a second. Thank you guys again for joining us for tonight's virtual class. My name is Jed Beasley. I am the manager for the Hunting and Fishing Academy, a program of the Tennessee Wildlife Federation. So we are so very glad that you're spending the evening with us. We hope everybody has been having a good summer, and hopefully you've been able to get out and do a little bit of fishing. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of that tonight. And I'm going to start out by posting one of our first little poll questions for you guys. You'll see a question pop up on your screen. Just answer the best way that fits you, and then we'll move on through tonight's class. And while y'all are doing that, I am going to just run through some quick kind of housekeeping things just so you guys know how this is going to work, what it's going to look like. If you have any questions throughout tonight's class, I'm going to try to have some time to stop and pause and address those. And you can submit questions by clicking on the question and answer function. That little button at the bottom of your screen there will be about the best way for us to interact with each other throughout the night. If you do have, if you want to use the chat, you're more than welcome to use that as well. But I'm going to be using that Q&A function on my screen to see your question. So if you want me to see your question, make sure you put it there, and then we'll move through the rest of the class. If this is your first time joining us, you'll notice throughout the class that we are going to have a couple of these poll questions pop up throughout. They're just a really good way for us to gauge, one, your experience, two, your knowledge level. And then towards the end, we'll ask a similar set of questions, and that just kind of helps us make sure that we, maybe we didn't miss any gaps or anything like that. With just a way for us to double check that we communicated things clearly, and that you guys got the gist of what it was we were trying to teach. So thank you guys for taking the time to do that first poll. It just asks again, how often do you fish small streams? That's what we're here to talk about tonight. It's kind of a niche specific thing. So we're going to talk about some basics and just things that you can be looking out for. But it looks like we've got a pretty good mix. Some folks, almost a third of the class saying I've never fished small streams before, but I'd like to start. Some saying I have a little bit of experience, and then a few of you guys say I frequently fish small streams. So that's good. We like to have a mix, and we're looking forward to diving into this stuff with you tonight. All right, so let's get into what we're talking about tonight. We're talking about small streams, rivers. If you're like me, you might call some of them creeks. They're all a little bit different, but they're all kind of the same. And so we're going to talk some basics tonight on fishing in those kind of niche specific places. Maybe you don't have a boat or a way to get out on bigger water, and you're wanting something different than just fishing at your local boat ramp. So we're going to talk about some of these little hidden gems that we've got across the state. Tennessee's covered in water, and all of our major waterways, our big rivers, our big lakes, they're all fed by these smaller waterways that can oftentimes have really big fishing opportunities. So that's what we're here to talk about tonight. And by the end of this class, our goal is that you would be able to identify the common characteristics of a stream with turbid current. We'll talk about what that means later if you don't know what that means. Name 3 species commonly found in these small streams. It can be different sometimes. You might find different fish in a small stream compared to a large lake or a large river. There's going to be some overlap, but there's just some really cool species that we find in these smaller streams that I think you guys are going to really enjoy learning about tonight. And then we hope that you'd be able to recall the different sections of a stream. So we're going to break down really what we're talking about in terms of a stream. There's going to be some terms thrown around that we think will be beneficial for you when you get ready to actually go out and fish. And so we're going to make sure that we cover those different sections of a stream, and then you can kind of recall what those are. All right, so we're going to start out tonight by talking about, we're just going to define some small streams. I'm sure that we can use more technical terms, so we're going to kind of divide them up into 2 different types of streams just for simplicity's sake, and talk about some of the different characteristics you might find whether you're in West Tennessee or East Tennessee. We're going to talk about some of those common species found, what they're feeding on, and then we're going to wrap up by talking about some gear and strategy and kind of where to find these places. So defining small streams, what are we talking about? Like I said, we're not talking about, we're not talking about our large rivers. We're not talking about our major waterways. We're talking about these smaller navigable waterways that kind of go unnoticed that feed into those bigger waterways later on. And like I said earlier, we could probably break these up into more specific categories, and I'm sure there's more scientific terms that we could put behind them. But for the sake of this class, I'm going to divide them up into two different types of streams or small rivers, creeks, whatever you want to call it. And the first one is going to be one with turbid current, meaning we've got fast moving water. So some of the characteristics of a stream like this, usually this is going to be some type of headwater. It might be a tailwater below a dam or something like that. But we're talking about water that's typically got shallower depths. It's going to have cooler water temps. That moving fast water doesn't allow time for it to get super stagnant. So usually the water temps are going to be a little bit cooler. And then they're going to have some type of rocky bottom primarily. If you're up here in East Tennessee, you'll notice if you get up into higher elevations, you'll have lots of streams that look like this. But you can find these all across the state. Like I said, it's just, you might even notice that there's multiple streams that have, different sections where it looks more turbid, or it might look something like this with a slow current. So we're going to talk about them in two buckets. Like I said, turbid stream with fast current, and then those with slower currents. So typically, those streams or rivers that have slower currents are going to have some deeper pools, pretty consistent depth. It's going to be deeper. Our water temps are probably going to be a little bit warmer than that water that's moving rather quickly. And then as opposed to having real rocky bottoms, these typically you're going to have a little bit more sandy, a little bit more gritty bottom. It's just some different physical characteristics. There's going to be differences in how you fish these, differences in, some of the fish that you might find in some of these. But I just wanted to kind of put a mental image, I guess, in your head of what these kind of look like. And if you're fishing a river, you might notice that there's sections, where there is turbid current, then it might break out into a long, deep stretch of slow current. So it can vary across the board, but we're just going to kind of put them in those two buckets for the sake of tonight's class, and then go forward from there. So let's discuss the sections of a river. Like I said, every stream, every river is going to be a little different, but it's all going to be generally the same. If we're talking about a small stream or a creek that's leading out to a major waterway, really early on in the development of that stream, you're going to notice some pretty consistent patterns that look something like this. We're going to have a riffle, which is these really shallow, rocky areas where you're going to have lots of surface disturbance. The water's going to be moving pretty quick. And then it's going to stretch into what we call a run. That's where the water is going to start to deepen. It's going to go down into those deeper pools, but you're still going to have some pretty uniform current, some pretty significant movement in that water. And then it's going to form into what we call a deeper pool. That's where the water is going to kind of calm and mellow out. The depth is, can vary depending on the waterway, but it's going to be generally a little bit deeper than it is at that riffle section. It's going to slow down. The water is going to kind of calm right there and form a deeper pool. And then a really important section of these rivers that we're talking about is an eddy, which is a swirling kind of reverse current. You'll notice here in this diagram, these can be caused by a variety of things. It can be some type of structure like this rock outcrop right here. You might be talking about a fallen down log or just something in the water that's causing this reverse swirling effect. And these are really important because eddies generally, we're going to talk about this when we talk about, feeding patterns and food sources here later on. But whether it be aquatic insects or just different food items that are filtering through this stream, they get trapped in these eddies right here. And it can kind of serve as a really good place to locate fish, is if you can find one of these eddies where the water is moving slower, the reverse current is happening, and it's kind of keeping those food sources circled right there in that calm pocket. And then towards the end of that cycle, you're going to hit what we call the tail out. That's where it's going to just kind of break back down into shallower water, and then it repeats that cycle of riffle, run, pool, eddy. So it just kind of keeps flowing that way. All right, let's keep moving here. This is just another diagram. If you were in our trout fishing class, you'll probably recognize this. This says trout feeding at the edge of a riffle, but it's really the same whether you're talking about trout or just other fish in any other kind of small stream. At the end of those riffles, Right here is towards the left of that diagram is what would be the riffle, and then it stretches down into that run and that deeper pool. Those riffles really serve as a kind of like a conveyor belt for different food sources. And so fish will congregate right at the end of those where that water starts to get deeper, and they'll just wait for those food sources to come filtering through that riffle at the surface. And it puts that food source right in front of their face. So this, again, this was a trout specific diagram, but you'll notice that any kind of stream, whether you're talking about bass or panfish, they'll all kind of congregate right there at the end of those riffles where that water starts to get deeper. They can kind of conserve energy right there. And again, they're just waiting for that food source to come filtering down through to them. Another really important thing that we're talking about a lot of times in the context of small stream fishing is looking for structure. It's the same as fishing major waterways, larger lakes. The structure there might be under the surface. You might not be able to see it as well. But when we're talking about, small stream fishing, it's really easy to sometimes to find what that structure is, whether it be big rocks, logs in the water, anything that provides a space for them to hide, a space for them to conserve energy. Those are places where those fish are going to congregate. So you can kind of see right here in this diagram where we've got a pretty, decent amount of current flowing through. All the places where the fish are is going to be where they can conserve energy, and also kind of provides them a place of ambush for grabbing hold of small fish, aquatic insects, whatever it might be. So behind rocks on the downstream side, they'll congregate behind those rocks. Again, logs, any place that causes, calming of the water, they're not having to fight the current as much. That's where you're going to find those fish kind of hiding out behind those different structural points. And that's kind of what we're looking for. We're looking for structure. We're looking for places where those fish are going to be hiding. And we're trying to approach those places in a way that gives us a decent opportunity at presenting them with our bait or our lure or whatever it might be. Okay, I'm going to pause right here. And then we'll go into talking about some species identification. All right, looks like I had a couple questions. Definition of turbid is cloudy, muddy, murky. That's not the characteristic of fast-moving shallow stream. Clear is the opposite of turbid. That's a good point, and I probably could have picked a better word for that. In my mind, turbid, I was thinking of just faster-moving water. But you'll notice that a lot of times in higher elevation streams, especially where you have that fast-moving water, it is still going to be pretty clear water that you can see through. And it's just going to be a lot different water quality, water characteristics from, a stagnant, still kind of slow moving body of water. But that's a good point. Thank you for pointing that out, clearing that up. All right. Let's see. Looks like we don't have any other questions. So let's get into talking about species identification. Like I said at the beginning of the class, there's going to be a lot of, yes, turbulent. That's the word I'm looking for. There you go. Thank you for that. There's going to be a lot of overlap in talking about species that we find in small streams and lakes, larger rivers, but there's going to be some that you might not find in those larger waterways and different places. So let's talk about some of the most common ones. This is not an exhaustive list. This is not this is not an end-all be-all list, but this is going to give you a really good starting point of what to expect, what you can find, and then we're going to go and talk about some different types. So we got panfish, we've got a couple different bass we're going to talk about, and then I want to end by talking about some of those little micro species that are really small that people just kind of overlook, and you might not be targeting those as something to catch, but it's just really cool little fish species that you'll encounter in these really smaller waterways. So bluegill, obviously, a lot of people, whether you've been fishing for a long time or maybe you're brand new to fishing, bluegill are going to be one of the first species that you're going to encounter. They're a panfish species. Usually, that one right there is a pretty big bluegill, but we're talking about a smaller fish, could fit in the size, the palm of your hand most of the time. These smaller streams, especially those that have slower moving water, deeper pools, that's going to be a really good place to find those bluegill. And similar to that, There's some other panfish species that we'll find, a red ear sunfish. A lot of times these all get confused because they all kind of look the same, and they're all kind of related, but they're all just a little bit different. But bluegill, red ear sunfish, and then there's some really cool ones that you'll find in real shallow creeks a lot of times is these little green sunfish. I just think these are really cool looking fish. Again, they're not very big. They can be a lot of fun to catch, you know, and throw back, but I just think they have a lot of really interesting characteristics and a lot of neat colors that folks just, you know, might not see fishing other bodies of water. And then the same goes for pumpkin seed. Like you can tell, they all kind of look the same. They all have similar shapes and characteristics, but they all just have a little bit different coloring patterns. And you might find them, you know, kind of all in the same place or scattered about different places. All right, so this is one right here that I think is really fun to catch. And it's actually not a bass. It's called a rock bass, but it's actually part of the panfish species, or family, I should say. But they're just really short, kind of chubby little fish that can be a lot of fun to catch. They're real aggressive on the bite. They've got these big red eyes that you can kind of identify them pretty easily with. But a lot of times you'll find those, again, fishing in that fast moving water. If you get in a place that's got, you know, an edge of a riffle, a lot of times those little rock bass will hang up right there below that and feed on different things. But that's just another really common species that you might find fishing a smaller waterway. And then this one right here, this is probably the one that a lot of folks that are, you know, really experienced in fishing smaller streams and creeks, this is the one they're going for, smallmouth. You can find smallmouth in almost any body of water in the state. But if you can find a place that's got, you know, a stream that's got sections that might have, you know, a few deeper pools in it, something like that, this can be a really great place to look for smallmouth. They're a lot of fun to catch. And when you're talking about these smaller waterways, this is going to be one of the bigger fish that you could probably expect to encounter. You know, you might find some largemouth depending on the stream that you're in, but a lot of the guys that I talk to and a lot of the times that I go out and fish for, you know, in these smaller places is I'm targeting those smallmouth. They're just a lot of fun to catch. Like we talked about earlier, they're a lot more aggressive on the bite. They're a predatory fish, and so being in a small place with small tackle and catching, you know, a decent sized smallmouth is a lot of fun. They have those really golden bronze coloring patterns on their back and sides, and it's just a really cool fish. And here in Tennessee, we're lucky to have a lot of them, and you can find them just about anywhere. But it's one of those iconic species that when we're talking about small water fishing, finding, you know, a big smallmouth is a really cool prize and a really cool trophy for a lot of folks. All right, so let's talk about some of these micro species and just small fish that, you know, you might not be targeting, but it's good to know that they're there for other reasons. So minnows, there's all kinds of different minnows, but we've got, you know, that's going to be a really good primary food source for a lot of these different fish species. They're tiny, they'll fit in your hand. You'll see them in big balls swimming through different sections of the stream, but it's just a really cool thing to know that's there. People use minnows for bait for all kinds of fishing, whether it be crappie, you know, different panfish. They're there for a reason. There's a lot of them, and it's just a really cool thing. And I think a lot of people just overlook because there's so many of them, but you know, you don't think about the significance that they can have on the health of a stream. All right, so in that same kind of vein, these next couple that I'm going to show you, you can actually catch these if you've got tackle that's small enough. And some people use them for bait for other fish as well. But I just think that these are a couple really unique fish that people just don't really know are there. And it can be really fun to catch, honestly, if you're just fishing for, you know, just anything. These can oftentimes grab hold of whatever you're throwing. Is these little creek chubs. Again, it's just a smaller kind of fish species that we have in Tennessee. One of the things that I'll tell you, if you've got, let's see, I think this is one right here. If you've got your fishing regulations, and if you've got there's a link that I can send out in our resource email with all the different fish species that we have in the state. You know, you'd be blown away at the number of small fish species like these little creek chubs that we have in Tennessee, and just learning all about those has been a great joy. But those are one that you can find. And then kind of in that same family, these little sucker fish is the northern hog sucker. Just again, a really cool looking fish. They're not very big. They're going to fit in the size, you know, the palm of your hand most times. But sometimes you can find, you know, a pretty big one, a pretty big chunky guy. Those can be fun to catch at times. Or if you're just into, you know, creek wading and stomping around, you can get out and find all kinds of different species like this. One that we didn't talk about, and I kind of left it out on purpose, was talking about trout. I figured we would get a couple questions about that. We've done, a couple other virtual classes on trout already this spring, so I left them out just for the sake of not diving into the same thing over and over. But obviously, especially in East Tennessee, when we're talking about high elevation streams, we're talking about maybe some tailwater streams. We do have excellent trout fishing in the state of Tennessee. And if you're interested in learning more about that specifically, you can just reach out to us and let us know. We can send you those resources from those trout specific classes that we did earlier in the year. Another one right here that we, is in that kind of small micro type family we're talking about are these stone rollers. These are really neat because they've got these little horns and these little bumps all over their head, all over their back. Again, just a really unique looking fish that if you're not looking for it, you might not ever know is there. But once you go out and you start fishing in these places, you'll say, oh, I think that's a stone roller. I saw one of those on that virtual class. Just another really cool thing that I like to point out to people that's there. It's not all bass. It's not all bluegill. There's all kinds of other fish swimming around out there that we kind of just ignore from time to time. All right. Let's see here. No questions at the moment. If you've got any, go ahead and throw them in there. And then let's talk about some common food sources. So fish, like most things, can be very opportunistic in what they're eating, meaning they're not just eating one thing throughout the whole year. They're going to eat what's available as they find it, where they find it. So it can vary across the board, and it can vary from fish to fish, but we're going to talk about a couple kind of generic ones right now, specific to these smaller streams that you can use to your advantage when you get ready to go out and fish. And the first one is what you see right there on the screen. Depending on where you're from, you might hear those things called different things. Crayfish, crawfish. If you're like me, you always call them a crawdad. Those are those little crustaceans with the big pinchers that you find a lot of times in these small waterways, especially in places that's got a real rocky bottom. I think I've got a picture right here on the next slide, I believe. Yeah, they get tucked up underneath different rocks. If you're like me and you grew up out in the out in the country and you went out flipping rocks and stuff, you usually see these guys swimming out from underneath rocks. They get tucked up underneath there. They're pretty abundant across the state from east to west, and it's a really popular food source for bass especially. Smaller fish will eat them, but those smallmouth, that's a really big food source for those. There's been a lot of times where I've caught a smallmouth, or I've caught some kind of little bass, rock bass even, and pulled it up to take my hook out, and there was a crawdad still in its mouth from where it had been feeding on those. So knowing that information can be really good as a fisherman when you get ready to talk about, lures and all that kind of stuff. But that's a really big one that, I think a lot of folks utilize to their advantage, but if you're new to it, you might just not have known that. So yeah, that's a really common food source for all kinds of fish in our small waterways. Other food sources, if you've watched any of our other virtual classes, again, I encourage you to go back and maybe look at some of those trout ones, because we talk about this in pretty extensive detail in those specifically. But aquatic insects, a lot of these fish, especially during the spring and the summer months when we're having big hatches of different aquatic insects like mayflies, dragonflies, caddisflies, they're feeding on those insects at all their different life stages, from the nymph stage all the way up to the fully mature flying insect that you see above the surface of the water. They're feeding on those things. But like we talked about earlier, those riffles, those act as really good places for aquatic insects to be filtered through the water. That's why fish congregate there. They're looking for those insects. Other small fish, like those minnows, those creek chubs, different things like that. Depending on the day and the circumstance, if a larger fish sees one of those come by, there's a good chance that they're going to be feeding on those as well. And then some others that you just might not think about. I didn't always think about this, but snails. There's a lot of other small crustaceans like snails out there that fish will feed on periodically throughout the year. Again, they can be fish of all kinds can be very opportunistic. They're not just eating one thing. So it's really helpful to know that there's a variety of things that they're eating out there, just like we have a variety of things that we eat. So that can be some really good things to just be thinking about when you get ready to go out and fish. So when you're thinking about, the tackle and the gear that you're going to take, be thinking about, well, maybe if what matching the hatch, what insects are hatching right now, what food sources are already available naturally in this stream or in this waterway can I use to my advantage to go out and create a better informed strategy. Okay, I'm going to pause there for just a minute, see if we have any questions. If I'm going too fast, you guys can tell me. Okay, so I'm gonna keep rolling here. Let's talk about gear. We get more gear questions in regards to hunting and fishing than almost anything else. It's gear and access. And so we're gonna talk here about gear. We've got some access slides a little bit later on. But for this type of fishing, we're talking about smaller waterways, where you might, just depending on your preference, you might be fly fishing even. We have whole classes where we've talked about that. I can mention it here if you have questions, but for the most part, you don't really need all that much to get started in this kind of fishing, and you don't need a lot of expensive gear, and it doesn't need to be big gear. You don't need a 7-foot rod with a bait casting reel on it that you'd use for bass fishing out on a large lake somewhere. You can get by with a light or an ultralight setup. So again, you can cater this to your preference. I'm just trying to give you a good starting point to use going forward to build on. But a popular setup for small water fishing is going to be a 5-foot 6-inch rod to a 6-foot rod, ultralight light rod, meaning it's designed for lightweight tackle, lightweight line, just something that's not real heavy duty. Get a reel that matches it. You can use an open face spinning reel right there, like you see in the pictures. You can use a closed face. They even make smaller, bait casting rod or reels as well. But most of the time, you're going to be looking at a smaller ultralight or light spinning reel with a really light monofilament or fluorocarbon line. You don't need 10, 20 pound test line when we're fishing for fish that are maybe 2-3 pounds, 4 if you're really lucky at the heaviest, if you catch a big smallmouth somewhere. But 2 to 5 pound test is what we're talking about, and that stuff is all pretty cheap in comparison to some of the other things that's on the market. So if you're looking to just really get started in this, you can go to Walmart tomorrow and buy all this stuff for probably $50 or less, depending on where you're at. But that's just kind of a good starting point. Like I said, you can get super in the weeds with all this stuff, and we have on different things. So if you're looking for more content or more advanced information, just let us know and we can send all that to you as well. But this is a good starting point. Just look for an ultralight rod with a light spinning reel and a lightweight test line, and you'll be ready to go in no time. And when we talk about lures, again, we're not throwing out big, ginormous spinning reels, swim baits, crankbaits. We're going to use all those different types of lures, but we're going to look at the smaller ones, right? And again, the great thing about this is that a lot of these are really cheap. That top one you see there in your picture, that's just a little beetle spin. Those are like 99 cents at Walmart. You can go out and catch panfish with those. You can catch those little tiny creek chub and stone rollers. You can catch those on those. And then you can even catch larger fish like smallmouth. You can catch some of the rock bass. You can catch those on these little tiny spinning lures. Those are some of the ones that I've had the most success with. I think they're super handy to have. And then even just something like this, those little jigs that you could throw out, they're all good to have in your arsenal and in your tackle box. And it's a good place to start. These right here have probably caught more fish in creeks than anything else I can think of, and it's just a pretty standard rooster tail. It's just another type of spinning lure. A lot of guys use these. I love fishing with rooster tails. It might not be the flashiest thing there is. It might be kind of basic, but if it ain't broke, don't fix it. If it works, it works. And so this is one of those things. Again, you can get them in all different colors, different sizes even, but a pretty standard rooster tail that'll run you, a couple bucks. That'll catch you all the fish you want in most small streams and creeks. I love fishing with them. They can be a really good thing to start out with, especially if you're new. All right, so there's all different types of crankbaits, but we talked about crawdads being a real popular food source. You can see these little crankbaits right here. I've caught a lot of fish using these in all different types of waterways, but especially in those creeks, when you're fishing for those smallmouth, different things like that. These little crankbaits can be really, really effective. They come in all different colors, as you can see here, but they're really super handy. You've even got these little minnow baits you can use as well. Just try to, the thinking here is to try to use something that, one, is the right appropriate size. If we're fishing really shallow, really small water, we're not going to throw a really big bait probably. But have something that's the appropriate size, and have something that's going to, get their attention, that's going to look natural in that environment. And those crankbaits, like those crawdads you saw before, and these minnows, they can all be super handy to have in your bag. All right, pause right here. It looks like we had a question. All right, do you have a color preference on your lures? I think it kind of varies. When I'm fishing with rooster tails or maybe like a smaller spinnerbait, again, it could vary depending on season and where you're at, but I've had a lot of success using white colors. It can vary on if you're in clear water or murky water, but I've had a lot of success on white spinning lures, and even some of the more natural colors as well, like those greens, and maybe even like a dark earth tone, like a black or something like that. Those have even worked as well. If I'm talking about those crankbaits you saw earlier, if I'm using something like that, I really like these red crawdad ones right here. You can catch fish on either one of those. I really like reds and whites. There's a lot of other people that really like those greens and chartreuses. I've caught a decent amount of fish using like a chartreuse rooster tail. I kind of play around with different things. I don't know if I can confidently say one is better than the other, because there's just so many factors that go into it. But the best thing I can tell you is just get a couple of them and just try out different things and see what works for you. Different things work for different people. So, but I usually try to stick with like those lighter colors, like a white or a red, and then even maybe a chartreuse green or something like that every now and then. All right. So let's talk a little bit about strategy. And there's a lot that can be said on this. We've talked about finding structure. We've talked about utilizing that to your advantage. But again, I think the first thing that you're going to want to do when we're talking about preparing to go out and fish is determining, am I going to wade fish? Am I going to use a kayak? What are my options? Weigh your options. Think about how you're going to get in and out, where you're going to go once you get there, and what you need to take with you. That's a big thing. Some of these streams and creeks might be more accessible with a kayak or a canoe or something like that. And some of them you might just throw a pair of shorts and some water shoes and get out there and wade around and fish that way. That's great too. I don't go into super a lot of detail right now talking about kayaks, because we've got a whole virtual class coming up next in July talking just about kayak fishing. So if you want to learn more about that, you can sign up for that one. But right here, I'm going to talk about wade fishing. That's kind of what I grew up doing, is just getting in the water with the fish, wading around. You can use a pair of waders if you'd like, but if you just got a bathing suit and some shoes, you can get out there and wade around and catch fish, no problem, just the same. So this is kind of like we talked about earlier, looking for structure. This diagram here, obviously we're wade fishing. I use this diagram for the fly fishing virtual class. And so you'll probably recognize it as somewhat familiar if you were in that class. But I just think it does a really good job of kind of visualizing what it is we're talking about once we get out there. So in this scenario here, the current is flowing from right to left on your screen. And so this guy's out in the water, and he's targeting these different places where he thinks fish might be congregated, right? Use your eyes when you get out and go fishing. Look for where the fish might be, right? So right here, we've got some different things we're looking at. Rocks, again, some more stumps, things like that. And there's not a real defined right way to go about which direction to wade. You can wade upstream, you can wade downstream. But right here, what we're talking about is when you're throwing out those lures, throw to where the structure is. You can throw up and across, directly across, downstream, upstream, but just be looking for where those different structural items are, because that's generally going to be where the fish are. All right, got a question here. How much do you worry about snakes? Cottonmouths, especially if you're wade fishing. This time of year, that's a definite concern. That's something that you want to be aware of when you're going out. I don't want to, mislead you in any way. We do have snakes here in Tennessee, but in my experience, most of the time, when I'm out there fishing, if I do see snakes or something like that, as long as I give them their space and let them do their thing, and I'm not going to interfere with them, then I'm not super concerned about it. Now, there are instances, again, where you might be taken by surprise, and that's a little bit different story, but it's just one of those things to be thinking about, to be looking for. I don't want it to be something that stops you from going out and fishing in these places, because, you're going to find reasons to not do it wherever you go. But again, it's a great question. It is a thought I have. I don't think it has been something that's kept me from going out and pursuing fishing opportunities to this point, but it is something that you need to be aware of, especially if you're in a place that's got that calm, stagnant, kind of warm water temps. That's going to be, where you're going to run into finding snakes. But a lot of times, as long as, they see you first, they'll probably get out of the way to the point where, you're never even going to see them. But if you do see one first, just bypass it, give it a healthy amount of space, and let it move on, and you'll usually be okay. All right. No other questions there. All right, so we're talking about strategy again. We've talked about some of the gear, talked about looking for structure, talked about wade fishing a little bit. Let's talk about how to find these places. If you're like, well, this all sounds good, but I don't know where to even find these places to go fish. Lucky for you, we've got some really good resources available to us these days that makes this a little bit easier. This is a screenshot of TWRA's interactive mapping system. It shows all different, waterways and access points across the state. We'll have some links to this, I think, in our resource email that we send out. And there's some really good features and really helpful tools here to kind of help you find different access points. It's not going to be an exhaustive list. Again, if there's a little local stream in your neighborhood, or right down the road from where you live or something like that, it might not have every little access point, but this is a really good starting place for you. It'll pull up a screen like this. You can zoom in to different areas. So when you zoom in, you'll start seeing all these different icons pop up. This is one, looks like we're looking at McMinnville right here. These different green icons, those are going to be like fish stocking, trout stocking locations. The blue icons are like boat launches and things like that. So you can get in and zoom in on these different little streams that you see, and just see where they're stocking fish. This stocking locations, that can often be places that you have pretty easy access, because they've got to be able to stock fish there. So those can be good starting points to go there and access different waterways. It also gives you a good indication of where some good fishing might be, just because they're regularly stocking these. And you can even click on those little icons and it'll show you even more details. So you can click on one and it'll say the stream name. This is Mountain Creek, right here near McMinnville. It gives you the location, GPS coordinates to how to get there. And then it also have any kind of specific regulations. You can click on those links and it'll take you to everything that you need to know right there, as far as just, general information that you might need to know. But this is a really helpful tool that a lot of folks just don't know that we have. They don't know how to access this, and so we try to provide that for you guys all the time. It's just saying, hey, this is a tool for y'all to use. It's free to use. It doesn't cost anything. You can usually pull it up on your phone and it'll work okay. But again, they have all these different icons all across the state. Just zoom in to where you're thinking about fishing and you'll start seeing these things pop up, and it can be a really good place to start if you're looking to plan a little fishing trip. There's some other apps out there. If you're in the hunting world, you might know a little bit about onX or HuntStand, and that, again, that's usually meant for the hunters more so than the fishermen, but it can also be a really good tool to have at your disposal, just to see, hey, It looks like this wildlife management area or this public hunting place, it looks like it has a small stream that runs through it. And so you can use that to go through and, to use onX and its features to go and find different little hidden fishing spots that you might not otherwise think of. But there are a couple fishing specific ones that are out there. This is just one called FishBrain. I've used it a couple of times. It'll look something like this when you pull it up on your phone. It'll have all these different little dots where people have logged fishing and catching and all different types of things. So you'll notice there's all these different little dots where you're like, I didn't even know there was water there. So you can click on those and it'll tell you, similar to that last thing we talked about, it'll tell you some more information, who caught what there, just different things. It's just a really cool community app. You can kind of connect and meet with different folks, talk about where you're fishing, if you're not opposed to giving away fishing spots and telling them what you catch. But it can be a really helpful place to start. I've used it a few times and I think it can be pretty handy. All right, got a couple questions here. Let's see, this looks like more of a comment. For a hard copy, a printed book, I highly recommend the Sportsman's Connection Fishing Maps Guidebook for Eastern Tennessee. It covers the East Tennessee reservoirs, rivers, streams, and tailwaters. That's great. Yeah, that's another excellent resource there that I didn't even think of. But yeah, thank you for submitting that, Larry. I think that could be really helpful for a lot of folks. Question here, the trout stocking calendar gives only the week trout will be stocked. How can I find out the specific day trout will be stocked? Can I call someone? Yeah, that's a great question. I think I don't know exactly which schedule you're looking at. There are some that give the specific day for that specific stream. It'll say something like Tuesdays at this time or something like that. There's even some that show specific calendar dates for different locations. I've used that one for trout before. I know the winter trout stocking program utilizes a calendar like that. Some of the different ones throughout the spring and summer might look different. But if you're having trouble figuring out the specific days, the best thing I would tell you to do is, yes, call somebody. You can call your regional TWRA office. Depending on where you're at, region 1, 2, 3, 4, you can call that regional office and kind of tell them what you're looking for, and they can either give you an answer or they can connect you up with the fisheries folks that are doing the stocking to provide that more information for you as well. All right, another question here. When they stock trout, do they stock fingerlings or adult? It can be a little bit of both. They kind of do a balance just depending on what they have available at the hatchery, depending on what time of year it is, different things like that. Most of the time when they're stocking though, you're going to be looking at those fish, trout specifically. We're looking at fish that are like 8 to 10 inches. A lot of times they're smaller fish, but they're big enough, viable enough to kind of live on their own. But then every now and then they'll stock some bigger ones too. But most of the time they're going to wait till they're probably 8 to 10 inches before they start stocking them. And then, they'll let them go and let them grow out there in the wild. All right. I want to pause right here and just see if you guys have any other questions. We're getting low on time, so I want to make sure that we're wrapping up and being respectful of y'all's time. All right. So while y'all are getting those in, let's read through them. Which of the following stream characteristics match a stream with turbid, or maybe we should say turbulent current? Select all that apply. So the correct answers there would have been a stream with rocky bottoms and cooler water temps. Those are going to be the common characteristics that we see in those types of currents with fast moving water. Usually if we have slower currents, your water temps are going to be a little bit warmer. And then that allows for opportunity for a lot of that sediment to kind of settle and create a sandy bottom as opposed to a really rocky bottom. All right, number 2, which of the following fish species is not typically found in a small stream, river, or creek? The correct answer there would have been a sturgeon. We do have some pretty cool lake sturgeon in a lot of our waterways. Those can be pretty big fish, but if you find a big sturgeon in a really small creek, I would love to see a picture of that. All right, number 3, you and a friend are fishing in a local stream. You notice there is a section of the stream where the water is swirling around, creating a slow moving section of current where insects and other food sources are trapped. What is this section of the stream called? The correct answer there would have been an eddy. And we talked about the importance of those and why fish congregate there. So it looked like most everybody got that one. Perfect. Thank you guys for taking the time to do that for me. All right, so while I'm waiting to see if any last minute questions come in, I'm gonna go through these last couple of slides. I appreciate you guys taking time to be with us in this tonight's virtual class. I hope it was beneficial for you. You know, if you have some comments or anything that you think could have been better or wish we would have talked about this, you know, feel free to let us know that. We want to make these classes as beneficial for you guys as possible. And if there's anything that, again, we didn't cover that you wish we did, let us know. We can try to send out some more information and resources there. But how to support our future classes, these classes are free for you guys. We want this to be an easy resource for y'all to utilize. And so if you feel inclined to do so, you're more than welcome to donate and help us keep these virtual classes going by scanning that QR code there on the screen. And then really the best way to support them is just keep signing up for the next one. We have loved doing these virtual classes. It's provided a really good space for us to go and kind of interact with you guys in a different way. So sign up for the next virtual class. Like we talked about, the registration process is going to look a little different now that we're running these through Go Outdoors Tennessee, but you can still find a complete list of all of our upcoming classes on the website, and then be on the lookout for a email from me that'll have some more specific instructions on how to sign up for virtual classes going forward. And then you can also follow us on our social media. We're on pretty much all the socials. You can find us there, interact with us, stay up to date with what's going on with our different programs. It's a really good way for you guys to just stay in the know with what's going on. All right, I'm going to answer a few last minute questions looks like we got here, and then I'll let you guys back to your evening. All right, what was the publication that has the trout schedule, sport fishing? Oh, let me go back and look. Let's see here. Where did that question go? Somebody mentioned the Fishing Maps guidebook for Eastern Tennessee. Sportsman's Connection is where that was found. Sportsman's Connection Fishing Maps. You can also find the trout schedule on TWRA's website. If you just Google search TWRA trout fishing, you can usually find a link to the trout stocking schedule pretty quick. All right, and then another question, can you fish in state parks? Yes, a lot of our state parks encourage fishing. That's one of the things that's listed on the activities to do there. Not all state parks have access to fishing, but there's a lot of them that have access to water and really encourage folks to go in and fish. So the best thing I would tell you to do is just check your check the state park's website and just see what kind of fishing access they have. But we've hosted some of our hunting and fishing academy events at state parks and let folks come out and fish for the day. So yeah, state parks can be a really great place to go and start fishing. Just make sure you check and read any specific rules that they have before you go out and start to fish. But yeah, that's a great starting point. All right, it doesn't look like we've got any more questions. We're right here at our hour mark. So I just want to say thank you guys again for joining us. I hope to see y'all on another virtual class here soon. If there's anything that we can ever do to help you guys learn or grow or whatever it is, just let us know. Hope you guys enjoyed tonight's class, and we'll see you guys on the next one. Thank you so much.